Ramesh, let me start with you because there's an opinion piece by Tom Edsall in the New York Times exploring the concept of Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, quote, out-Trumping Trump. Edsall says in part, quote, lacking Trump's impulsiveness and preference for chaos, a President DeSantis, with his attention to detail and command of the legislative process, might well match or exceed Trump as liberals' worst nightmare. What do you think? And could that be his ticket to the Republican presidential nomination?
Well, I think that the idea of Trump without the chaos and impulsiveness, I just wonder what's left, really, when you're talking about that. When people say that DeSantis is Trumpy, what they mean is he's combative. He's willing to take the fight to Democrats and liberals, and he won't really give an inch. And that, it seems to me, is separate from the things that caused Trump to be so unpopular and to repel a lot of traditional conservatives. It's not the same thing as saying, you know, I want to get rid of NATO. It's not the same thing as getting into fights with journalists about their faces and so forth. And I think one of the things we're seeing when people say DeSantis is Trumpy is there's this idea that, well, we all disagree, we all dislike Trump, this group of people. That doesn't mean we all disliked him for the same reasons.
Right. But Paul, let me ask you, because one of the things that DeSantis is doing, I think Trump was known for a lot of things, or is known for a lot of things, not just being impulsive, but also he ran right for culture war issues in a way that most presidents don't do as a general matter of course. They might do it in an election year, but they don't necessarily do as a matter of course, where Trump was constantly running for, I'm going to side with the people who hate Colin Kaepernick, example. And he didn't have to say anything. You know what I mean? That's what I mean. And there is something of that in how DeSantis is approaching his job. And that I think that could be very attractive to Republican voters.
Absolutely. There's a lot of research that what Republicans want now. It used to be when I was a kid, Republicans wanted low taxes, limited government, strong defense, family values. Okay, everybody. You know what they want now? The number one issue for Republicans? Own the libs. It's let's go, Brandon. That's what they believe in. And Mr. Governor DeSantis has figured that out. It's no longer a system. Politics for them is no longer a system where we allocate resources in the most equitable way we can. It is, I just want to own the libs. And he has done that. Now, the problem is he's beating up on vulnerable kids. So people like me really find that distasteful. It's fine if he wants to attack.
You're talking about trans kids.
Yes, trans kids and gay kids in Florida. For a powerful governor to be attacking the most vulnerable kids in his state is pretty loathsome.
Well, he would argue he's not.
Right.
Right.
Yes, he would.
He would argue that he's just giving parents rights, and schools should not be teaching age-inappropriate material to kids K through 3. That would be the counter argument.
He would say that. I mean, and this has been kind of the headline for Republicans, whether it be governor's race in Virginia all the way to DeSantis, is that, you know, by introducing legislation and policies that will dictate what can be taught in a class. Some would say erases certain parts of history in a classroom. By introducing something like the Stop Woke Act, that's now being advertised under the guise of empowering parents. But the issue is, and what critics would point to, is the footage that you just showed. That also showed parents as well. And
right.
There's the criticism that you're proposing these policies, saying that they will empower, parents when it comes to the classroom. But what about those parents that also fear for the well-being of their children as well, and how they could be impacted?
But there's recent polling that has kind of, you can watch DeSantis's rise through this, and there are two elements that are really interesting if the polling holds and if it applies beyond Florida. One is his appeal to independent voters, and the other is potentially his appeal to Hispanic voters, although I think Florida Hispanic voters probably lean maybe a little bit differently than Hispanic voters in California or, what have you. But these are two elements where an appeal could actually carry national implications. The one thing we haven't talked about is the stronger DeSantis becomes, the harder it is for Trump to mount a real comeback initiative, or at least the more of a potential clash there is. So I think there's a lot of interesting elements to watch here.
It's also worth noting that the Morning Consult and Politico did a poll on the policy that we're talking about here, this education bill in Florida. And
this is the one about not making people feel guilty, or the one about not talking about age-inappropriate sexuality?
Age-inappropriate sexuality, and it had a majority support from Americans, 51 to 35% split. So the idea that, just because there are a lot of people who are very genuinely outraged by this, that this is necessarily going to be a weakness for the Republicans, That might not be the case.
There was an ABC poll, so about 62% opposes. It depends on
how you ask it.
Depends
Right?
on who asks with all these polls.
As a Democratic strategist, what I hope the Democrats do is not chase every shiny object, but instead tell people, is this the biggest problem facing Florida? Ron DeSantis' party has run Florida for 25 years. If the schools are screwed up, and they're very mediocre in Florida, they're ranked 23rd, it's because of the Republicans. They're trying to distract you by dividing you. And Democrats ought to be talking about jobs, crime, COVID, issues that really matter in your life.
So one of the things, what's something Paul just said about in his previous answer about owning the libs is what Republicans stand for. The way that I think Republican pollsters or consultants might view that is not owning the libs. It is Donald Trump. Remember, this was something that people talked a lot about during the Trump years. He has the right enemies, right? That's one of the things that Republicans, conservatives liked about Trump is that he really bothered the media. He bothered establishment Republicans. He bothered, Hollywood. He bothered, the cast of Hamilton, whatever. He bothered all the right people. That's what owning the libs is. Now, sometimes there's performative Marjorie Taylor Greene, ridiculousness. But I think this idea that all the right people don't like Ron DeSantis is something that will serve him well, potentially.
Could galvanize, the base as well. I mean, look, we talk about this tension as well between DeSantis and Trump. I mean, as you near a presidential election, those voters that did gravitate towards the president because he tapped into a certain grievance that was felt across the country by specifically targeting some of the entities that you were just describing and tapping into these culture wars. That is something that seems to be mimicked here, by the Florida governor as well. I mean, one thing in Thomas's piece that you were previewing before, he talked about how you have these series of headlines that have gone out. DeSantis berates reporter at press conference. There's some that would say, look, that's actually something that is going to continue to galvanize some of his followers moving forward. I just want to follow up on something Paul was saying, too, because when it comes to the other side of this coin, while Republicans continue to kind of tap into what we've been describing, these culture wars to galvanize their base, there is the other side of growing anxiety in the Democratic Party, too. And, many folks, moderates as well, approaching the White House saying, look, while the governor continues to do this, while Republicans across the country continue to do this, it's even more reason to focus on these tabletop issues such as crime and COVID.
You were talking about. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody. Appreciate it.